Hello, friends. I am Will McTavish, and today we're going to be checking out a way to try and reconstruct some of the more interesting sounds from the Gone Girl soundtrack by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. I caught this when it came out, and I loved it immediately when I heard it in the film. But it's only recently I've kind of sat down and really dug into it and had to listen to what they're doing, and there's certainly a whole bunch of interesting things going on. So this is going to be the first of a couple videos looking at some of the sounds I'm just going to choose to pull out. This first one now being that really big, bassy, kind of distorted pulse swell sound in, I know it's in the track Consummation. I think there's a variation of this track as well somewhere in the soundtrack. But it's from a particularly awesome scene in the movie. If you haven't seen it, I'll just leave it at that, but check it out. Now, this is just my very humble reconstruction. Of course, these guys have a room full of fantastic like Moog and modular synth stuff and a whole world of tools to make these really kind of contemporary and out-of-the-box sounds. But nevertheless, I think we can do a passable job. So I'm going to play a bit from a track that I've put together that was just sort of a loose attempt to play with what's going on in that track, not necessarily to reconstruct it sound for sound. But anyway, so take a listen, and then we'll get into how I made this sound. And there you have it. All right, so let's get into it. Okay, so I chose to start this sound with an FM patch in Ableton's operator. Now, any FM synth available to you should work just fine. Of course, there's the sort of famous FM8 from Native Instruments, which is super powerful. I do have it, and I have used it, but I've actually kind of become a bit more partial to operator in the last year or so. If you're doing this in FL, for example, I believe it's Citrus that you're going to reach for. But in any case, any FM synth that I've seen should be able to pull this off. So looking just at the patch, in the primary oscillator, we're just doing a sine wave with a sort of slow attack and decay. I would keep them roughly the same timing on both sides of it. Oscillator B is, of course, modulating oscillator A fully. And I've taken it to the kind of fixed ratio. Well, it's check fixed, but you'd think unchecked would be when it's not fixed, like this. Anyway, so this is this kind of makes it feel a bit more noisy when it's not, a perfect ratio. When it comes to FM, that's a very clean sound, which is what you want sometimes. Tracks nicely across the keyboard, but keeping it a bit more random works well for this. So above that, oscillator C, feeding B, now on that sort of fixed ratio of 4, and just kind of feeding it about halfway. So this is the sound without any effects. I'm going to bring it up a bit because the effects will give us a lot of volume when we get there, but so here it is. Yeah, so not that interesting yet. The other important element is, though, and what I've found starts to give a bit of predictability to getting this sound, because this is not the same patch. Of course, I've twiddled knobs, especially, but it wasn't the same patch to begin with that I used in this demo track. But I'm confident we're going to arrive at a similar result. So that kind of filter formula is to take a low-pass filter, drop it to the cutoff frequency to somewhere in sort of the mid-low range. So I have a 577 here, 500 sounds good. And bring that resonance up and to almost full. Something about that really high, sharp resonance from a low-pass filter hitting the distortion, which we'll get to in a sec in the effect change, really starts to bring out that, crazy kind of sound. So the distortion. I'm using Driver for this from Native Instruments. Now, this was free. They give it away for free on Christmas or something. This most recent one or the year before. I think it's actually something like $40 now, which is pretty reasonable because it's a cool sounding distortion. I don't use it a ton, but it seemed to fit the bill for this pretty quickly. All the more quickly because I basically reached for this preset, Beast and Bass. So once again, without the distortion, I'm going to bring that volume back down, and with. Immediately starts to sound pretty crazy. So the only other thing I've done is a little bit of stock Ableton reverb, keeping that decay time a little bit lower. We're not really looking for a ringing out kind of reverb, not an echo hall kind of reverb. Keeping it small and kind of tight. It just adds a little bit of air, which makes this sound feel a bit more polished and mature. So with that reverb and without. So subtle effect. Okay, so now we're going to check out how to place this in the arrangement and sort of build up that swell, right? Get it angrier and angrier over the course of like at least probably a minute or 2 minutes if you want to do something similar to what happened in that track, Consummation. So yeah, let's check that out. Okay, so made a MIDI track here, and we were kind of playing this with this low E here. So we just want to make a few pulses here. And we'll loop that so we can listen to it as we go. So there it is in kind of its angriest incarnation. Let's bring this up a bit. So to get there from something a little bit more ambient sounding, there's 2 or 3 parts pretty much that you're going to want to kind of play with here. First of all, the filter cutoff within Operator, or some external filter if you're using that. So I'm going to draw in a bit of automation from practically nothing up to our kind of high point for this, which is actually sort of a midway frequency cutoff. That's starting to bubble up nicely there. The other thing in Driver is this resonance control. Now, if you're using some other distortion, I suppose you could substitute this for like a wet dry or some other tone shaping control that might be present in the plugin. It's kind of up to you to play with and experiment with, but this is what we're working with here. So again, we'll draw in some automation. Again, making a big difference to the point where that first one we have almost nothing, right? There's very little audio, which is fine. Because again, as you extend this out, and you make that envelope really, really long, or that automation curve, that's what, made this sound so cool in that original track, is that build, right? It just builds and builds to where it starts to sound just suffocating, in a good way, I think. So the only other one you may want to play with is that resonance from your original filter. Because as I said, this is a big part of the sound, as at least in my experience and experiments, the way it drives your overdrive, the way it hits the overdrive or distortion. So again, something you can kind of build up And oh, crap. Let's hear how that sounds with an automation curve on the resonance as well. Again, practically nothing on that first note. And that's pretty much it. So, like anything, there's so much room to experiment with this sound. The envelopes on your original oscillators, the parameters you're gonna automate or control towards that goal of building this into a really, really big, crushing sound. Yeah. So, any questions, comments, please leave a comment or send me a message. Any requests for anything else? But again, I'll be trying to be back shortly with the second part of this. We're going to look at some of the sort of sequenced, machiney kind of sounds from this soundtrack. So check back soon.